Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Rosemary Shortbread cookies. That's right, looks to the contrary, I'm not really a big cookie guy, which is why we haven't done many videos on those in the past. And another thing I'm not a huge fan of is adding unusual ingredients to things that don't need them just to make them different. But as you're about to see, I'm going to do both those things, and I think I have a pretty good reason. This is my favorite cookie. You're welcome, people working on the Food Wishes trivia game. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this incredibly delicious and surprisingly easy cookie. And one reason it is so simple is it only contains a couple ingredients, which are butter, and lots of it, flour, and some sugar. And that is pretty much it. We will, however, sneak in a little bit of salt and a few drops of vanilla, as well as the aforementioned rosemary. And by the way, could you please stop staring at my wrinkled t-shirt? Thank you. So to get started, what we'll do is we'll pour our sugar over our butter, which, by the way, is not soft. Okay, I took it out of the fridge and cut it up into this bowl about 15 minutes before I wanted to start the recipe, so it's still pretty cold and firm. And then to this bowl, we will also add a little bit of vanilla extract. We're also going to put in a little bit of salt to make everything taste better, as well as about 2 tablespoons of freshly chopped rosemary. And then what we want to do is combine all this with the back of a spatula or a spoon. And because that butter is still pretty cold and firm, this is going to take a minute to get going, but you can do it. Put your back into it and just keep smushing and smearing. And eventually, thanks to friction and other physical phenomenon, that butter is going to soften up a little bit, and you should be able to smear and smush everything together and end up with a mixture that looks like this. And by the way, that butter should still be fairly cool to the touch. All right, so while this would be easier with soft butter, I don't want you to use soft butter. Use the cold butter. It's going to take an extra minute, but I think makes for a better dough. And once that's mixed up, we're going to lose the spatula and switch to a floured hand to mix this. So I'm going to coat my fingers with the flour, and then we'll dump that flour into our butter mixture and create the rest of this dough by hand. So what we'll do is we'll start off with one hand, and we'll just kind of smush and smash everything together just to get it started. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if I start with 2 hands right off the bat, I end up with flour flying all over. So I like to work it over a little bit with one hand first, but once it gets going and it gets to about this point, we will introduce our second hand and continue mixing. And basically we're mostly working with our fingertips, sort of rubbing everything together. And what we're watching for here is for this to go from floury crumbs to buttery crumbs, which should look something like this, which, by the way, is only going to take a minute or two. And once it gets to this point, and you can kind of press everything together into a dough ball, we're going to stop. Okay, we don't need to mix it anymore in the bowl because we're going to continue to work the dough as we form it. So at this point, let's go ahead and transfer it to our work surface and gather everything together. And then continuing on with our trusty hands, we're going to press this into a disc and then into a rectangle approximately a ½ inch thick. And by the way, I would normally do this on my stone countertop. Unfortunately, it's the same color as the dough, so I did it on my steel table instead, so you can see it better. But unfortunately, there's a lot of give to it, so that's why it basically looks like I'm working on a trampoline. But like I said, we will press that down into a rectangular shape, but we're not done. We do want this pressed a little thinner, but it's hard to go any thinner with our hands and get it nice and even. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and cover it with a piece of plastic, and then we have a couple options. We want to press this down to about 1/4 inch, and if you want, you can use a pan like this or some other flat object to kind of push it down, and that can work very well if you're on a solid surface. But because my table did have so much give to it, that really doesn't work out too well for me. So my preferred method is to simply roll it with a rolling pin right over the top of the plastic until we have something relatively uniform and approximately 1/4 inch thick, maybe just a hair thicker, but something close to that. And once we've pressed and or rolled that into our desired thickness, we will take our bench scraper and try to get this back into some kind of rectangular shape. And by the way, feel free to trim any uneven parts. You can totally re-roll any excess dough. But bottom line, somehow, some way, you want to end up with as close to a rectangle as you can get, at which point we're ready to cut our cookies. And because, as you know, I'm such a stickler for precision and perfection, I'm going to use this ruler so I can get perfectly even straight cuts. And no, that is not a new ruler. And you see the white stuff on there that looks like flour? It's not flour. I think it's whiteout. Remember when we had to use that with our typewriters? Good times. So we'll go ahead and we'll cut our dough into nice even strips. And then like I said, if you have to trim a little, trim a little. And you can roll those scraps and make more cookies. I actually saved my scraps for an experiment that you may or may not see at a future date. And then once we have our strips cut, we'll have to slice it the other way. So I measured the length, which was 11 inches, so half would be 5.5. And then I didn't know how to divide 5.5 by 3. So I just went ahead and cut it by eye. As you can see, not even remotely close to even. But the good news is it really doesn't matter, because when these are cooked, they're going to look amazing. And besides, at least they're all the same width. And then once those are cut, just take your bench scraper and transfer those onto a lined baking sheet. I'm going to use a Silpat, but parchment paper will work beautifully. And then once our shortbread cookies are trayed up, we need to S&F them, which stands for sugar and fork. So first up, we're going to sprinkle the top of each one with a little bit of granulated sugar. And you don't need a tremendous amount here, just a couple pinches per. And then once those have been sugared, we're going to go ahead and give them the old poka poka with the fork. And by the way, at culinary school, it's not called the old poka poka. It's actually called docking. And above and beyond giving them their signature appearance, they also will help these cook more evenly. And I want you to penetrate each cookie exactly 4 times so that we have 16 holes exactly. And why is that a big deal? Because 12's not enough and 20 is too many. So we'll continue on until all our cookies have been properly forked, at which point these are ready for the oven. So let's go ahead and transfer those into the center of a 300-degree oven for approximately 50 minutes or until beautifully golden and looking something like this. Okay, what we're shooting for is something that looks exactly like a shortbread cookie. So the top should have a beautiful light golden color, and if we turn one over, which totally burned my fingertips, you'll see the bottom should be a beautiful golden brown. And speaking of burnt fingertips, what I like to do is leave them on the pan for about 10 minutes until they're cool enough to transfer to a rack, where we will let those cool completely, at which point our Rosemary shortbread cookies are ready to serve. And like I said in the intro, I don't generally like to add ingredients to things that are already perfect, but this just totally works. I mean, if I blindfolded you and gave you one of these cookies and didn't tell you what was in it, the vast majority of people would have a hard time guessing there was rosemary in it. Oh, they could tell something was in there, something wonderful and mysterious, but it's unlikely they would pick out the rosemary. And besides the flavor, I think the texture of these things is just absolutely perfect. Just the right combination of crisp and crumbly, yet still very tender and buttery. But anyway, that's it. Rosemary shortbread cookies. Incredible flavor, incredible texture, and gorgeous to boot. I mean, look at that. Look at it. All right, that's enough. So I really do hope you give these a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.